Dames en heren, een hele goede morgen. Het is een genoegen om u vandaag in uw midden te zijn om deze 9e editie te mogen modereren. Heureuse d'être parmi vous, mesdames et messieurs. Welcome to all of you. Welcome to the heart of Europe. Now, being the capital of this continent leads to an obligation to show what's happening in the rest, maybe not the world, but at least the rest of Europe. We leven in een razendsnel tempo, ik hoef het u niet te zeggen. Met de technologische vooruitgang verandert alles in een sneltreinvaart. Vandaag willen we u uitnodigen, willen we u motiveren om vooruit te denken, om vooruit te kijken naar wat er zich zoal in het buitenland afspeelt op het gebied van vastgoed. Now, our future way of living, of working, of traveling and spending our free time has a great impact, of course, on real estate businesses. Now, therefore, real estate professionals must not only be aware of what the future will bring, but also have a reason to look around and to get to know the best practices abroad. Now, we send our children everywhere in the world on gap years and on Erasmus exchange programs. I think it's time for us now to move on and to go on Erasmus. Alors, par cette rencontre, l'UPSI aimerait susciter l'envie d'aller voir au-delà des frontières. Nous avons deux orateurs ce matin de haut niveau, Rajib Gahir et le professeur Bruns Berentelk. Alors, nous venons d'écouter le CEO Olivier Carrette en bon équilibre. Je vous propose de passer la parole au président de l'UPSI, Serge Fautré.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'll be very short and hardly time to have three languages, so permit me maybe to just speak in English. The mission of UPSI is to promote, develop and represent the Belgian real estate sector. We are at times probably better at promoting ourselves internally than promoting ourselves externally. And one of the missions that we have trying to reinforce within UPSI is to promote our sector more actively, more professionally, more quicker, stronger abroad. However, before knowing how we can sell ourselves abroad, we probably need to hear a little bit more what foreign countries, foreign cities have to teach us, and that's why we have Rajib Gahir, as well as Professor Dr. Bruns Berentelk. And we would like to hear what is happening in Hamburg. Yesterday in another audience, we heard what was happening also in Pittsburgh. We have to learn before we can teach other or before we can represent. And as Marlene was telling us, he was not talking to us about concerto or sonata, but rather this morning about indeed going ourselves on Erasmus and learning. Your presence this morning is already 50% of the success. The other part of the success would be if we would have any chance to have some sort of dialogue. The odds are against us because, you know, the lights are there, we can hardly see you. But if we could start and have some dialogue and avoid having just people talking and making ex-cathedra presentation, we would really be happy. So if you don't mind, please make us happy and let's have a little bit of a dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Serge Fautré. Now, our next speaker, or the first speaker, is the founder and the MD of Redefining Real Estate. She believes in building businesses that tackle problems from a first principles approach. She launched the company We Work. I think she's 27, so I think it was at 26-year-old. We Work in Europe, and was responsible for taking it from inception to 8 buildings, over 600 members, a team of 40 people, and an annualized revenue of over $50 million in just 18 months. Now, this sparked her focus on the intersection of real estate, new experiences and technology. Then she founded at 27 Redefining Real Estate, a boutique consultancy and a business builder specialized in property, co-working, co-living and real estate as a service model. Now today she will share her vision of worldwide trends in future living and working. Please welcome Ms. Rajib Gahir.
Okay, good morning everyone. Really honored to be here in Brussels. It's actually my first time in this city. And yes, I'm going to be talking to you on what is one of the, I'd say, broadest topics, the future of living and working. And to me, this really encapsulates all of the innovation that we're seeing in the space and defines what I think is a new approach to real estate itself, which is why it's a very exciting time to be in the industry. So, a little bit about myself, as I don't see too many familiar faces right here. So I started my career in finance, working with a number of different financial institutions in London. Financial crisis happened, I thought let me move across to technology. So I worked with a few technology companies such as eBay and Rocket Internet, both in Silicon Valley as well as in Europe. I then joined WeWork in its early days. So WeWork is a huge name today. The company actually started 8 years ago. I joined the company to launch them in Europe. So I set up the UK market, Berlin, Amsterdam, and it was a really exciting couple of years. And this really propelled me into looking into how is real estate changing? I mean, what models are coming into real estate that didn't exist before? How can we think about the models we use in technology and real estate? And that's why when I say in the past, specialization may have been key. Today, with the emergence of technology hitting every industry, understanding a multitude of different industries actually seems to be a bit of a competitive advantage. So, in a broad sense, what we're seeing is a huge fundamental shift in living. So this can be categorized in a few different ways, but primarily we're seeing huge clustering. So within the next 30 years, we're going to see urban density increase by 75%. That's billions and billions more people living in urban cities. And one way we can look at this is the average workspace per person has compressed to 25% of what it used to be in just the last 6 years. Thankfully, the sharing economy is providing somewhat of a remedy to this. And we can define this as the access over ownership generation. So people don't care about owning houses anymore, but they want to stay in a nice Airbnb. I don't mind if I don't have a car, as long as the car can come and pick me up in 2 minutes via a cab. This is what we're seeing in terms of the access over ownership generation, and no wonder the most valuable companies in the world today hit exactly this. Uber, Airbnb, the value is in providing experience versus owning any assets, which these companies rarely do. And thirdly, community. So the proliferation of the digital economy is hitting us in a physical context as well as a digital context. And where people lack the community and traditional living structures, they're craving it through online interfaces, through messaging in their workplace, through Slack, even though they're working remotely, through attending a meetup after work. And these are all three huge influences that we're going to see massively impacting real estate now and in the future. So why real estate is very interesting is for a multitude of other industries, they can tackle this change in consumer behavior much faster. For example, take commerce. In the last 5 to 10 years, we've seen a massive change in the way people shop, and it's been responded to by the industry. Today, I can shop via my phone, I can look at someone on Instagram and figure out what they're wearing and purchase it straight away. In real estate, well, there hasn't been much change in the last 10 years. In fact, there hasn't been much change in the last 50 or 100 years. And yet, the way people are living has changed so much. So what we're seeing now is that this is reaching a bit of a breaking point where suddenly people are realizing, wow, this really needs to change because the product doesn't respond to what people desire in the market today. So over the next 25 minutes, I'm just going to talk firstly about the current real status of living and working in terms of some facts that we see across the world. Secondly, how the industry is responding, and I'm going to break this down into disruptors, who we can define as startups, as well as incumbents, because incumbents are making moves as well. And finally, how we can operate in this new environment and what we believe the future looks like. So some key facts to start. So this is really the biggest point by far, massively rising urban density. In short, where are people going to live and work? Everyone is flooding into the cities. In terms of a pure numerical basis, we're going to see 3 billion more people living in urban cities in the next few years. And this isn't just a phenomenon constrained to developed economies, we're seeing it across developing nations as well. No wonder we're seeing signs of this pressure already in the majority of large urban cities. London, my hometown, for example, rent has massively displaced income. So for the average, say, 25, 27-year-old looking to rent their first apartment, it's costing them 60% of their gross income. In terms of net income, what they're left with is around, well, £44 or €50 per month to save towards a house. No wonder then that home ownership is at an all-time low. At the same time, in the last 10 years, we've seen the number of renters more than double. And this is not just across people in their 20s, it's across all age groups. As well as renting at an all-time high, we're seeing a transition in how people are living. The only more asset-light way someone can live versus renting their own apartment is by sharing an apartment. And roommates have taken over in terms of even more people are living with roommates than they're living with their own spouses. This is generation rent, but it's also generation flat share. The main way millennials are living is in urban cities, in a flat share, spending most of their money on that flat share. Correlated to this is a change in the way people are working. Self-employment has been steadily rising across the developed world. In the US today, 40% of people are self-employed. That's a huge number, and it's only set to rise as automation, AI, and machines come in and take more and more people's jobs. In addition to this, global entrepreneurship is massively rising as well. In developed economies like across Europe, the number of businesses that are being set up is increasing every month. What this expresses is people actually have more of an appetite for risk. If they have more of an appetite for risk, then they have less of a concern about security. And again, this feeds into the changing way in which people are living. Whilst entrepreneurship is a chosen risk, there's a lot of risk that is unchosen. So freelancing and zero-hour contracts are becoming commonplace. Again, I'll take an example from the US. There are 53 million freelancers in the US, and terms like moonlighters or diversified workers are becoming commonplace. This is not necessarily a choice for people to want to work in an unstable manner. It's just all they can get and what the market is providing them. In addition to this, remote working and digital nomadism is much on the rise. So for the millennial today, the new version of luxury is essentially no assets, no ties, no responsibilities, and the ability to say work on a beach. Work on a beach, wake up, have mango for breakfast, do a few hours on the laptop, because that's really all they need. And while some may say this is a revival of the hippie culture, to many of the new age workers today, this is their definition of luxury. And whilst it may be subjective, this is something that we definitely need to be aware of, because it's a key question to understand, to address and fulfill the needs of tomorrow's big spenders. So what does all this mean? Well, a new utility function, that's for sure. So whilst a decade ago, the utility function was defined by security, obedience, a job for life, or if not for life, at least a few years, today, people who are in the working and living world are demanding flexibility, balance, freedom, and travel as a right. This is having a big impact on the utility function, and it's important to address because the utility function is the first thing we should look at when we're thinking about any product or service that we're bringing to the market. As well as a disregard for ownership of housing, cars, and clothing, as long as it can be accessed as it is in a very instant way. Even if I want to wear a designer dress, do I really want to go out and own it? Well, no, because then I need to think about where to store it, how to clean it. I would rather just use an app, get what I want in the size and color, delivered to me in 24 hours, and be able to return it at will. This is a really interesting behavior, and again, it's leading to an emergence of a variety of different companies who are focusing on this new user experience or journey, which is about efficiency and getting what I want at instant access. And these are the companies today that are the most valuable companies in the world. And it's a behavior that the real estate industry can also observe, because as more and more people choose, or not by choice, simply by the realities of the economic situation, cannot afford to own assets anymore, there's going to be increased value placed on how these assets can be accessed and experienced. Employers are certainly noticing the change. The people that they hire are now generation rent and generation flex. And in order to attract and retain this new type of employee, employers are having to change the way they position themselves. Apple recently announced final plans for its $5 billion campus in the West Coast. Is this a real estate investment, or is this an investment in people and brand? Most likely the latter. In the same way, it's not just big companies like Apple. Ticketmaster is a reasonably mid-sized startup in London. Its office actually has a slide in it, and this is commonplace now to have at least some play area, some common area, beer on tap, drinks on tap, for employees to come in and enjoy themselves. In addition to that, flexible working, unlimited holidays, and propositions like annual summer camps are being used to entice and attract employees. And when I say to retain employees, retaining in today's standards means I hope he stays for at least, 2 to 3 years would be great. I just really don't want this guy to leave after 6 months. 2 to 3 years in today's terms is even a long time. So based on this new desire of people to live and work in experience-driven and led situations, existing commercial real estate solutions just don't cut it. Standard offices are not up to the standards that corporates are demanding for their employees or that the end consumer wants to work in. On the resi side, we experience a similar problem where the traditional solutions are not what is being demanded today, but in a different context. So I'm going to talk a little bit about overshooting. Overshooting essentially just means where the solution that the incumbents are bringing to the market is in excess of what the mainstream consumer can desire or afford. And of course, there's a lot of reasons behind why residential has been developed in a luxury way. Some is need, but the reality is that the mainstream consumer of today is okay with a much simpler product. They want a much simpler product, they want a much more affordable product, and it's just not being provided in the market. What this means is that it opens the market out to new businesses to come in and build a product that's in line with what the mainstream consumer wants. And I think that's going to be a really exciting opportunity in the residential sector going forward, because that requires serious amounts of innovation to get right. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about the context and the new themes that we're seeing. How is the industry responding? I'm going to start by talking about what we can define as disruptors or startups. And this is taking examples from across the globe. But essentially, what we're seeing is that a breakdown of barriers to entry is occurring due to consumers redefining components of value. So what I mean by this is that traditional barriers to entry in the real estate industry have been very, very high if we purely consider the asset side. But with consumers placing more precedence on experience and flexibility and connectivity, this opens the market to a variety of new companies that can be focused on the real estate experience versus the real estate itself. And this is where the barriers to entry are much lower and current needs are not being met by traditional incumbent players. For example, Nooklyn is a renting platform in Manhattan that I've used. Is the 23-year-old of today who's going out looking for their first apartment going to walk down the high street and go into an office letting agent and say, "Hi, I'm looking for an apartment. I really want to share because I can't afford it. Can you help me out?" Not really. They're going to go onto Google and they're going to Google apartments and flat shares close to me or in a particular neighborhood. Who's capturing that consumer? It's not the high street agent, it's the online platform that's optimized and understood that this is the new buyer journey. What Nooklyn does really well is it's a startup that started literally 12 to 24 months ago. They've attracted thousands of people to book apartments through their website because they understand what the consumer is looking for. Find a roommate, explore hoods, because I know you can't afford a flat on your own and you need to explore hoods because you probably can't live in the one that you'd like to because it's too prohibitively expensive. This new type of approach is what we're seeing through what we can define as prop tech. Another really interesting area, if you're not aware of the company Trussell, it's massively disrupting the mortgage market. So who would have thought I would think of selling my property, my biggest asset, to an online startup who started around, again, 2 to 3 years ago? Trussell, but it's happening. I mean, hundreds of people have used this platform and sold their houses to Trussell. And the reason it's happening is because Trussell taps into a pain point that no one else has solved before. If I'm in a chain and I need to sell my house, there's not a solution out there that echoes to me. So Trussell has managed to establish credibility and trust, not by how a traditional bank would, setting up a huge amount of real estate assets and high street presence, but instead through online recommendations, referrals, and repeat business. And this is one of the biggest disruptors in the mortgage market right now, and we're seeing a lot more companies like this coming up in Europe. Thirdly, space on demand. Breather is a company out of San Francisco that Peter Thiel, a very prolific tech investor, has invested in. He invests in iconic 0 to 1 type companies. Breather doesn't actually own any assets. Neither does it lease any assets, but it has a full spectrum marketplace of spaces that I can go on and book for an hour or a day. What we're seeing here is a platform approach to a place to work. Breather itself is a purely asset-light company, but it owns the customer relationship and it owns the inventory of assets. And to the end user, it provides a bit of an income stream. As well as companies like Breather, we're seeing other companies that utilize traditional real estate like restaurants and say, hey, we don't need to own your restaurant, but what we can do is give you a tech platform that means that we can turn this into a co-working space during the hours that no one is in your restaurant. Because hey, you have really valuable real estate and we can do something with that. And through that, we can see in the future a potential move towards flexible real estate, where a space is not defined for just one use case, but can be defined for multiple use cases. And this can be facilitated through technology and operational companies that provide this adjustment in use of space. I'm going to talk a little bit about operators as well. So the companies that I've mentioned on the platform side is what we define as prop tech, and they require a huge amount of tech investment. But companies who purely our operational businesses require far less tech investment, and we've seen a huge amount of co-working companies set up in Europe and the rest of the world in the last 24 months. When I was setting up the first WeWork, and this was in London at the end of 2013, early 2014, it was a very unfamiliar concept. We were quoting office prices per office versus on a square foot basis. And even this, it was tough for people to get their head around. Today, it's commonplace to assume that I'm going to have a monthly flexible rolling membership on this office and I pay per person, all inclusive. Operators, there's a new operator setting up pretty much every week in London itself. And the model is pretty simple, and it makes a lot of economic sense. I, as an operator, can lease a space for, or if I'm lucky, get a management contract for around £50 per square foot. To the end consumer who wants a space in my co-working space, I can charge around £120 per square foot. How does that work? Because I'm providing them flexibility and a curated design-led environment. And for that end consumer, that flexibility and design-led environment is really worth that much. As well as co-working, one of the biggest buzzwords of this year, at least in my world, has been co-living. And this is applying similar principles of co-working to the residential sector. But really, what does co-living mean? What it's doing is providing a brand where a brand didn't exist before. It's making the experience of finding and sharing an apartment just a little bit nicer. And for this a little bit nicer, people are prepared to pay, again, a huge premium. Common set up around 3 years ago in Manhattan. It already has around 300 rooms under operation, has raised 20 million in equity investment, is valued at around 100 million, don't ask me how. And it has a wait list of 3,000 people who are waiting for them to open more rooms. At the end of the day, it's just a room. They haven't done much in terms of innovation on the room itself, but what they have done is they've tapped into the consumer and said, we're going to make sure you like the people that you live with. We're going to make sure you don't have to think about buying milk and shared communal supplies. We're going to take care of that for you. And people are prepared to pay a premium for just these little things to be taken care of. Common is a co-living approach in residential, but we're also seeing new companies come in and disrupt the idea of a hotel or serviced apartment itself. So Rome is a co-living company focused on the shorter term stay side, and it has a very interesting proposition. Rome's proposition is, you pay me £800 a week, and you can live anywhere in the world. We have properties from Bali to Miami, to San Francisco to London. You pay us a weekly and monthly fee, and you get access to all of these properties. It's a new global lease. Is this the next disruptor to the hotel and service department? Well, certainly, the huge majority of people who are now working remotely, this is a clear winning scenario. Again, huge flexibility and community premium. $800 a week is far more than a standard apartment in London or even New York. Yet, there's an appetite for these types of new facilities for people in this flexible generation move age. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my previous employer. Thankfully, I joined them when they were worth far less than this. But WeWork is a classic example of a company that owns absolutely no assets, yet has a valuation of 16, now actually 18 billion. That's the same as Boston Properties, which owns 47 million square foot of office space. How does that make sense? This is a real point of contention in the real estate industry. I know some people hate WeWork and just don't understand how it can be worth so much. I think it is quite smart, but maybe a little bit biased. But what this really points to is, yes, they may not own the assets, but I tell you what they do own. they own that relationship with the end consumer. And that relationship with the end consumer is more important than ever, because in today's age of digital platforms, retargeting, online marketing, email marketing, that lifetime value of the end consumer is inherently valuable. And that's why companies like WeWork or Uber or Airbnb have the valuations that they do, because they own that end consumer relationship. Okay, so we've spoken a little bit about startups and what I define as the most novel disruptors out there. I want to talk a little bit about incumbents, because I've been working with traditional property companies for the last year, and they are realizing that they want to and can innovate in this space themselves. And one thing that you will be pleased to know is that, of course, incumbents do have an unfair advantage. Whilst the barriers to entry are breaking down a little bit in real estate, it is still the industry with some of the highest barriers to entry due to capital requirements, zoning, planning, the relationship-driven nature of the industry, and operators and players and funds already in the space do have a real head start that they can capitalize on. So one way that they're doing this is to actively recognize that they need to invest into innovation itself, and some of those prop tech companies that I was talking about. So funds like Starwood Capital, Hines, and companies like CBRE have directly invested into venture funds that are purely focused on property or property technology. Fifth Wall is one of the largest. Last week it just closed a $212 million round to invest in prop tech companies. It wants to take money from institutions who are already in the industry, because it realizes for smaller companies to really excel, they need to partner with and gain access to the network of the larger companies. So prop tech is an industry I see like fintech or financial technology, where it's really going to require the new players to work together with the older players to build the lasting, sustainable, and truly scalable solutions. Concrete VC is a VC that was started in London a few months ago as well, purely with the remit to invest in property technology. And Starwood itself has just put $5 million in to say, hey, this is our expenditure on innovation, and if something comes out of it, great. If not, maybe we'll learn something. So incumbents are also diversifying into setting up their own brands and new operating companies. And this makes a lot of sense, because in most cases they have the resource and the know-how to do this. So Go Quarters is a venture off of Medici Living, which is a large real estate company. And this can be expressed as a corporate equivalent to Common, the disruptor I talked about earlier. So the one thing that Go Quarters can do is actually invest more in the spaces it builds. So they are doing ground-up developments, as well as higher level type of redevelopments. These all being co-living environments, and when I say investing into the developments, it's, hey, what percentage of amenity space versus room space do we have? What are our common areas? How do we make sure everything is Wi-Fi enabled? But co-living is a huge industry, and it's set to take off, and the incumbents are definitely better placed to act on this, because they already have the assets, they have the financing, and they have the network to get started on it. Accor Hotels is synonymous for investing in innovation, and it's done that in the last few years through multiple acquisition of companies. More recently, it acquired One Fine Stay, which is a higher-end version of Airbnb. So whilst most people in the hotel industry were saying, hey, what's going on with Airbnb, Accor actually directly invested into a competitor and brought it in. So Joe & Joe is their new brand that they're going to be launching next year. And this really taps into the understanding that, again, their consumer of the future is not going to be thinking, hey, what's Airbnb? They're going to be thinking, what's Marriott? That's the consumer of the future. How do they access that consumer of the future, they need to build a new product for them. So Joe and Joe, they're defining not as a hotel or a hostel or anything, they've come up with a new definition for it called an open house, and it's essentially flexible places to stay. You can sleep in a beanbag if you want. It's at a low price point, it's going to be a global endeavor, and it's really trying to tap into and capture this new age millennial consumer, which they realize if they don't innovate with a new product, they will lose. Brockton Capital, it's a private equity fund that I worked with last year, and their foray into innovation is, yes, let's set up our own operating company. So Brockton Capital traditionally have just bought, held, and purchased sold assets. Fora is their new brand that they spent a year investing in terms of building the brand, thinking of the brand story behind it. And it can be expressed as a challenger to WeWork, but they're focused on the slightly, let's say, more refined demographic that may feel slightly uncomfortable in a party like WeWork. But as a fund, they've invested $300 million into this operating company. So that's a huge bet because they see the value here in the future. And finally, on the side of what incumbents can do, they can redefine the product itself. And this is something that I think is very, very interesting and is going to be a requirement going forward. Because as terms like flexibility and community become entrenched, they are going to become more of a commodity. So true innovation is going to come in actually innovating on the product, which again is something that we haven't seen much of in real estate. We're seeing it now with modular development, and governments such as the UK government are very heavy on this. And it makes sense. I mean, how can we afford or even come close to hitting the targets of homes we need to build when construction costs are so timely and disabling towards that goal? It was a really interesting development I saw in China where they built a 57-story skyscraper in just 19 days. And this really expresses the power of what modular development can achieve. At an extreme of that, we're seeing new types of home products being developed, which can, in a way, be defined as a pod home or a flat pack or a Kia-style home. So Casita launched a product earlier last year, which is a 20-meter squared, all-in-one flexible house, which they'll sell for around $120,000. But as more people come in and enter this market, that price point is being massively slashed. Last year, a Japanese company launched their competitor to Casita, and it was priced at $20,000. So, well, you need to get the land, but still, a lot less than a standard home. And what products like Casita are doing is saying, hey, let's take a blank sheet of paper and let's design a home. What do people need? They need a space to sleep, they need a space that's flexible for other purposes, and we can provide that. This is how it looks inside, and it has areas that can be flexibly changed into different types of environments. So your dining room can be transformed into a study by pushing away some furniture. So as urban density increases, again, one of the biggest points, the only way that people are going to be able to fit in cities is if they have a little less space. And products like Casita are built exactly for this purpose. So how do you operate in this new environment? Well, we've spoken about a few different things that are happening in terms of property technology, new operating companies, investing in property technology through venture funds. But I think there's a few ways that you can go about this. So one is ask really big questions, and questions that haven't been asked before, such as who is my customer and how can I build a relationship with them? When I've been working with property companies and funds, what is most striking to me is that most people don't actually know who their customer is. If you don't know how your customer is, how can you build a product or solution that's tailored for them, and how can you own that customer relationship, which is the most valuable asset going forward. I was speaking to Heinz yesterday, a large US-based real estate fund, and the conversation that we had was something like this. I was talking about a new living product that we're working on, and it has shared bathrooms. And I had 3 people on the call tell me, this all sounds great, but people will not have shared bathrooms. They just don't get the shared bathroom aspect. And I said, well, I see your point, but this product is half the price of the next best alternative in Manhattan. And I think the biggest issue is affordability in Manhattan. Fair point. And I think secondly, we actually tested this, and we launched a microsite, and we have 300 keys, and we got signups for 400 keys in 7 days. So that assumption is not really valid anymore. And I think this is a really interesting point, simply because until you start questioning assumptions, you won't find those golden nuggets that are really going to influence the products and services of tomorrow, that are going to disrupt the market. Secondly, assess the value curve, and this is something that is definitely shifting. So whilst in the past the value has really been with the developers, I think we're going to see this changing as development itself becomes more of a commodity. Value is going to shift to pre-development and the incubation of new products and services and techniques like modular development, setting up new technology platforms. At the other spectrum, it's going to come in, how do I own the experience, how do I own the customer, and how do I market and brand in a way that is defined and resonates with that end consumer. So I really feel that we're going to see a shift in the value chain, and this is something that everyone should be thinking about in the industry. Invest in R&D to capture more of those either sides of the value chain. And this can be through methods like modular development, which is the future, or new materials such as timber and graphene, which are proving to be immense in terms of their results on new developments, flexible floor plates, or even things as simple as how can I rebrand myself, how can I understand who my end consumer is, and how can I understand the innovation that's happening out there today. Just want to end with a little bit about what we're doing about it. So Co-Creations is our advisory company, and we work with incumbents as well as corporates, and this helps us marry what's happening with both sides of the spectrum. And we advise on co-working, co-living, and just new real estate as a service models. These are some of our clients to date. But the aspect that I'm actually a little bit more passionate about is Viva House, which is really come through not seeing a solution to a real need in the market. So for us, the biggest issue going forward is going to be how do people live in urban cities? How do you keep things reasonably affordable? So Viva House is our game changer to combat that. So our innovation is in the development of a modular pop-up housing product. Pop-up means that we can go into any building and set up a supply of housing in a way that cuts costs by over 50%, in a way that developments can be set up and constructed in 3 months versus several years. And that's what we're spending a lot of time on. This is one of our buildings or developments in the UK, in Manchester. We've got projects in the pipeline in London and New York, and we are looking at other major cities. So, in summary, the future of living and working. Very broad topic, but a few points here. So one, there is a new utility function. It's out there. It's how people are living and behaving right now. And it's important to build appropriate products and services that are in line with this utility function. Secondly, it's not just about a building anymore. The asset is, of course, a huge part of it, but a bigger part of it going forward is about what happens in that asset and about the R&D behind that asset and the experience overlays on top of that asset. Finding a way to invest in innovation, I think there's going to be a huge amount of opportunity and potential for startups to partner with incumbents because both need each other. And finally, to own the consumer. It's not about just owning the asset, it's about owning the consumer, and this is going to be how to stay proactive and stay focused in the industry going forward. Yeah, so thank you. I enjoyed myself up here, so I hope you have a great day, and those are my details, so looking forward to connecting with everyone through the rest of the day. Thank you.
Coming from the other side as well. Thank you very Gahir. Thank you for this clear and interesting view on future trends of living and working. Now, we have the pleasure to have the CEO of Hafen City amongst us as well, Europe's biggest inner-city urban development. Now, building, taking into consideration the future is, of course, a very tricky thing. It's a paradox also, because one must fix the future in the present and make the realization future-proof. To extend the life cycles of buildings, we must think and we must have this clear view beyond the future, which is kind of crazy in a way. But what is Hafen City Hamburg? Well, it is setting new standards, at least in Europe, in successful integrated urban development that simultaneously takes local and global requirements into consideration. On an area of 157 hectares, a lively city with the maritime air is taking space, bringing together workplace and residentials, uses, culture and leisure, tourism and retail facilities in new downtown on the waterfront. Now, what can we learn from Hafen City Hamburg and from the collaboration between public and private players? Please welcome Professor Jürgen Bruns-Berentelk.
Good morning to everyone, ladies and gentlemen. It is a pleasure to be here in Brussels again, and you have wonderful projects, not least this one. But my question is not talking about wonderful projects, but a slightly different perspective. What can very large-scale urban development projects do for city development and actually do for the future of the city? And let me, as it has been mentioned already, start with a little bit of a paradox. We are trying to create, when we are talking about the future of the city, something, even when we are building it anew, something which is producing inflexibility within the city. Fixing something in terms of buildings, in terms of infrastructure, means that we have to look into the future in decades. If we are lucky, we are looking to the future in terms of even a century. But we are fixing something instead of creating actually fluidity. And this is a paradox for the start, talking about the future of the city. And the interesting thing is how to embed the possibilities of the future in this newly created environment. I will try to show at least that there are some strategic elements in dealing with those aspects in a very large scale urban development. One of the principles is to create diversity, physically and naturally also in terms of institutions and networks. Secondly, we are looking into using socio-technological transformation. We are not looking only into technological solution, but a socio-technological transformation, changing also the institutional background of the city. And thirdly, building into the system of the city adaptability in terms of its physical layout and naturally also in terms of its institutional layout. But in every case, let me be clear about that, we need to start with the present. So the aspect of the continuity I have been mentioning is of central importance, and not in the first place to start with an idea, with a big vision of transformation. Because when you are not thinking about continuity at the end of the day, you will lose the identity of the city, which is an important element of understanding, of reading, and liking the living environment of a city. you lose many of your people, many of those, so to say, which are not international travelers and do not want to live, so to say, in London, New York, and in Brussels at the same time when they see the buildings in Hamburg. So what is the specific Hamburg identity which is actually creating the environment for people to have a livable space? And naturally, we would also lose many of the participants in the real estate sector and actually important stakeholders if we would simply think in terms of transformation. So continuity predates actually transformation in designing and developing a major urban development project transforming a city. So we actually talk about a co-evolutionary and basically also an evolutionary process in terms of planning and in terms of development in order to talk about what is part of this future we are thinking about. So it's not a radical change, but it is a gradual change which starts basically slowly and becomes over time far more radical. And I will show you how this actually may be working. This is a picture where you see almost only continuity. On the right-hand side, you see the World Heritage Site of Speicherstadt was basically built between the 1880s and the 1920s in Hamburg, and which provided the most valuable trading area for port goods. On the left-hand side, you see the red brick buildings of Hafen City looking north, so to say, attaching to the old part of this commercial city on 1.1 kilometers. And you see the height is similar, the materials are similar, also the use is completely different with offices, with residential, commercial on ground floor, gastronomy, hotel, while on the right-hand side you have an internal conversion of the use of the buildings. Looking though at the waterfront in Hamburg, the waterfront from the Elbe River, 3.1 kilometers from west to east, you see the dissolution of the horizontal character of the city. You see Elbphilharmonie, 110 meters high. You see a very high-rise building on the eastern part, 200 meters, which is now in the public tendering process. And in between, a horizontally developed white city, an almost white city, with spikiness on 60 to 70 meters, mid-rise towers, which become specific to Hamburg, mainly residential towers, increasing the density and the value of the waterfront. And when we are looking now into what Hafen City is, and it has been mentioned, it is an environment which is benefiting from a prime location. It is basically expanding the city center by 40%. There's no project in Europe which expands the city center within a limited time period of 25 years now by 40%. So working from the central place of the city, it organizes change. And secondly, the most important aspect added to that is that it is a waterfront project. And you all know waterfront projects are very valuable projects. So combining these aspects is naturally a very good starting point. But making this future-proof, that does not automatically mean, so to say, following business as usual and developing this on the basis of a good starting point. And you see how ambitious we are. We developed 7,000 residential units. We basically will develop 45,000 jobs in different types of commercial enterprises, 35,000 in the office sector, 10,000 in other venues. There will be 5,000 students, which are already there in Hafen City, different types of universities. We have a significant proportion of cultural amenities, naturally retail, gastronomy, entertainment, hotel, leisure, except City Hall and maybe one or two theaters you will not find in Hafen City. Everything else you find in this new downtown. The questions I will discuss to make it, so to say, a little bit more transparent are related to three aspects. How to create urbanity in this environment. We want livable cities. We want entertaining cities. We want cities that physically work, but emotionally provide a basis for a good living and working environment. So that is a question of urbanity. Then we are looking, so to say, into the question of social diversity. You might also say how to integrate social justice into a completely new urban environment. We all know Jane Jacobs, for example, in the past argued you can only have good projects if you basically have old and new buildings mixed. But this is not basically possible in Hafen City because we have to raise all the land, and basically there were only 6 buildings which were halfway, reasonably in a halfway stage that we could preserve them. So how do you build, so to say, socially inclusive, socially diverse new city? And finally, there is the multidimensional sustainability aspects, ecological aspects, and that looking into the institutional background is necessary in order to understand basically a little bit about how this is done. This was the starting point of Hafen City in the 90s, and I do not want to explain that. Major harbor areas all over the world have been looking similar like that. Industrial production, naturally underused harbor activity areas, but also major railroad yards, and the German railroad owned significant proportions. And these pictures show basically the starting point of some of the developments, raising basically some of the land, vacating the land from the existing buildings, building a park and an identity space and playground for children on top of a subway which was just finished in terms of construction with no building around, but creating the value of the city in terms of common goods. And this is basically a range of different types of buildings which have been finished. Elbphilharmonie, but the headquarters of Spiegel, which is the German news scheme, but you also see bridges very intelligently designed to take out middle segments without having an operable system, simply by water power, but also having different lanes, so even in future capacity you can change, so to say, traffic systems. So building intelligent, multi-usable infrastructure systems has been part of this. You see a traditional harbor on the ground floor. You see even on the lower left side something which is basically characterized by a design price that is a subway station roughly 25 meters below the ground, but below also the water level of the adjacent Elbe River. And you see the lighting is already done in terms of like there would be containers. So integrating design perspectives, high quality aspects, are part of the strategy to create identity of this place and also make it long livable for people. But you also see that there are quite a number of open spaces. So when we look into a space like Hafen City of 157 hectares, it means you have more ordinary parts of the city which have general high quality, but which are not spectacular. You can see this is residential mainly, it's 70% residential, other uses on ground floor, restaurants, some office space, smaller office space intermediately, but you have a public waterfront, all in Hafen City, you have green roofs and something, and you have basically horizontal development of the city, basically generating room for a viewable link or a visible link to the existing inner city. We even have a small area because we have 10 different quarters in Hafen City which will be preserved the way it was. And in this case, it's a cultural quarter, basically started out in 2015 on a former railroad yard. So where a lot of flexibility is kept, that is not even flood-proof, but we are renting this space for €5 per square meter in order to integrate quite a different number of activities, and this has been a very interesting element in the cultural transformation of the harbor areas, because it was fenced in and there was no culture possible, like you might have heard in many other harbor developments of the world. And naturally, another element of this spread of activities in terms of diversity is the Elbphilharmonie. You see the existing building, the storage building, 35 meters high, a little bit more than 50 years old, and on top of that, Herzog de Meuron designed a building which basically you see has a major concert hall, 2,100 seats, a smaller one, has a hotel, residential unit, so complex mixed-use ideas transformed into this building, and you can imagine that is one of the reasons why the budget never worked out. But I must tell you, it started out as a private project where the project developer told me, Mr. Bruns-Berenthal, give me the site and I show you that I can basically build this building, cost-free for the city. It cost almost 800 million euro for the city. So you can also be overambitious. But the product is great. It has been opened in January and will serve as an iconic building for the culture in Hamburg, but also for the city. Because as you can see, there are some elements to it, linking actually the history to the new building. Being at the fringe of Hafen City, looking into the port area, looking from the public plaza and 35 meters over the city center and the Speicherstadt, for example. So you get a new understanding of what is the DNA of the city from this building. Not the building itself only is an important element, but the view from this building is tremendously important for generating identity and future aspects. But this also is part of a quite big normal project. This is part of a very big mixed-use development where in the southern area of UPSI Quartier, Unibail-Rodamco, also working in Brussels, is actually producing the mixed-use schemes with almost 90,000 square meter gross floor area of commercial space. The interesting point is, so, if you approach this area, which is now under construction, you will not recognize this to be a shopping center. And that is part of our ambition, so to say, to create also urban design and urban development solutions. And this is coming from the north side. It is still open. It will actually have in the southern part 11 separate buildings here linked with an open roof and not climatized. So why we are doing this can be easily seen, and I will show that a little bit later, but these figures show the mixture of the uses. So actually developing a framework in a city like Hafen City also changes the outlook of global players. And naturally, the global player probably did not come and say, well, we want to build, so to say, a lot of hotels, we want to build, so to say, a lot of residential, we want to build cinema, we want to build a cruise terminal, a vertical one, and so on. So that was part of the framework we discussed. And because you start out in a convincing way with a long-term planning vision and showing the benefit of a different type of concept, this allows you also to change investment strategies for developers. Here, the bottom picture shows a little bit the function of an open spatial system like UPSI Quartier, how you get from, for example, Elbphilharmonie and spread out the people walking in Hafen City and supplying bottom-up basically the interest and the productivity from the walking to the ground floor spaces in Hafen City. We have 330,000 square meters of ground floor space. So if you want to keep that lively, not have offices and residential there, you need to bring in the people. This Unibuy concept is doing that, but the interesting point is you would never achieve it with an enclosed shopping center. You need to do it with spreading out the interest of people, walking around and basically looking around at different places and actually providing a far more spread out customer base. And the reason for that is that we actually have also a mixed-use urban development. This shows that at second floor, not at ground floor, second floor is a mixture between offices and residential. So it's not really clustering. And what you see in terms of clustering at the level of this area is basically enforced by noise-based, so to say, environments from the harbor or from the Elbe bridges on the eastern side. But in principle, offices are next door to residential, and actually schools are next to an office building and so on. And this fine-grained structure in terms of urban design is working almost perfectly. And this allows also at ground floor, showing now a yellow, not only to have 5.50 meter high ground floor spaces to generate flexibility at those ground floors and have, so to say, different types of companies moving in, not only in the first place, but in 15 and 30 or in 50 years, but actually to have a significant starting point, which is difficult enough, as you know, when you're talking about how to get the starting phase done when all the people are not there yet, when the people are not living there, and so how to deal, so to say, with the economic starting point, with all these ground floor uses, which are an important element to the urbanity of Hafen City. And naturally, I do not want to explain that in detail. You know, public spaces are tremendously important. Jan Gehl has been talking about the spaces between buildings. Naturally, we as producers, planners and builders of not only of the infrastructure but also these public spaces generate these, so it has the chance to become a city for all Hamburg people, but naturally also for all the visitors. So even if they would never enter a gastronomy space, they could be part of this urban environment, which is basically not a very big part, but which is a waterfront network system as the basis. And you can see in terms of changing the structure of the city in comparison to the existing one, I will not explain that in terms of figures. You can raise the efficiency, you can generate far more public goods, you can limit the street system in terms of the requirement. For example, in the existing city, it's 45% almost required for the street system. In Hafen City, it is below 25%. So that is naturally an important element. And we embed all these strategic, so to say, achievements into a planning system which is based on a master plan in the year 2000 and changed master plan for the eastern part in 2010 to increase the density, to embed the learning of the first years of Hafen City development for the eastern part of the development. And then we have design competitions for the different quarters. We had 10 in the past, defining functional plans before the statutory planning is actually starting. So it is a process of generating ideas. It's not top-down planning, basically defining the statutory status of the planning, and then naturally some of the developers don't like that, but all agree to it because it helps, so to say, to provide a high standard. We have architectural competitions for every individual sites. Now, roughly 800 architects have been working on Hafen City, at least at the level of the competition. When we are talking about, so to say, this planning process, which is, after all, more or less a top-down process, there is naturally also very much a bottom-up process. And you will ask yourself how actually the developers, the investors are, and their ideas are integrated. And basically we are doing it in 4 different steps. We start out for every separate area, not for every site, but separate sub-area, with mobilization process. And I will explain in terms of the social structure of housing a little bit how this is done. So when we are talking about putting a number of sites to a public tender, which we are forced to do in general, then we are basically having public meetings and inviting, first thing, the community housing groups. The community housing groups are a weak, so to say, institutional background, but they have a lot of ideas, a lot of ambitions, but not enough money and not enough professional knowledge. So we start out with them and, so to say, try to mobilize their idea and explain the framework. Secondly, we discuss, so to say, the social institutions which are dealing with the disabled and the elderly people and a lot of others who might want to come to this place and join in with developers, but having no understanding how to do that. And my third meeting is with the developers and investors. So then all the others are coming in, and then I'm leaving a certain period of matching and creating market density and actually the market knowledge. By that, the understanding of the market basically changes. The possibilities change to a very significant degree. And then we are starting with the tendering process, which you all know, that is basically a competition process, but we change it to a very significant degree. We say 70% in terms of the criteria we use as non-price-based criteria. So there is a strong bias in terms of non-price criteria, but in terms of content and process criteria. So what is the kind of intelligent, innovative product you want to deliver in the housing sector, combining different elements? And when we're talking about the prices, it is not a fixed price for a land site, but the value for different types of uses in the building. We call this in German Schichtwerte. So the different types of uses have different values, and by this different valuation, you create actually, based on the ambition of the city, a residual valuation process for the developers, coming up with ideas they, at the end of the day, have only to a limited degree to pay for. I'm willing to participate in paying for that because the land has not an absolute value, but a relative value in terms of the innovation it is actually generating. And then we have a period where the best, so to say, bidders are not basically following up by buying the land, but there is a joint cooperation phase with architectural competition, with getting a building application, basically fine-tuning everything, and that's a very cooperative relationship. And at the end of the day, we sell the land, it is freehold, but in the land sales contract, not in the planning system, in the statutory plan, in the land sales contract, there are the joint obligations defined, and that is sometimes penalties, but also long-term easements and so on, which basically stabilize these innovations in a certain degree. And what we say is actually that this is, in academic terms, naturally, that it is a commodification process, and at the same time, you create value for the city while you are selling it. It is also a decommodification process. Let me run through two of the other aspects a little bit faster. When we are talking about social diversity, let me look with you at one building, which was basically started with a public tendering process in 2009, which was finished in 2014. And you see it's a big block. On the one hand side you have a park, on the other hand there is a big road, probably having at the end of the day 30,000 cars per day. So a medium location in terms of what can be done. But if you look at it, the diversity we were asking for generated quite an interesting offer from the developers, which was a commercial developer and a housing cooperative. And you see the development of the building, although it is all red brick building, it had two architects showing, so to say, different faces to different external spaces. And it shows also the interior space. So the interior space is a private space where you can be a little bit more easy in terms of the quality you want to provide for the public space adjacent to the streets. But what is more interesting is what is happening in this building. On the left-hand side, you see the street. This is a very conventional street with red brick. And this is part of the historical picture, and you would say, how boring, yeah? How boring. Very horizontal and very close to the area of the Speicherstadt. But when you look at the facades and go beyond that, what you can see closer up, you see the diversity within those buildings. You see, for example, in the middle of the left-hand side, a 3-star restaurant, 3 Michelin stars. On the other hand, you have social housing, affordable housing in this building. You have social facilities like the PME Academy, which is kindergarten, but also providing services for men or women who need a conference call at 11 p.m. to Japan and do not know where to basically put their children when they are young. So having, so to say, the mixture of residential and office allows for a new juncture of basically merging different types of lifestyles and business requirements. We see we have a living community project with disabled people where students from the adjacent university live without getting charged, but they are servicing those students and for 10 hours a week. And you see, naturally, there are kindergarten spaces, 200 play spaces within this building of 156 units, and naturally, quite a number of other units. There are medical offices and so on. This is the type of diversity and probably also the social resilience we are able to create. And this is by putting into the tendering processes the basic and fundamental ideas, asking, so to say, the questions what this site could contribute, and then on the right-hand side showing not the offer, but how to translate the offer into the requirements for the architectural competitions. This shows, at another scale, actually the area of the eastern part of Hafen city, diversity, social mix, public uses at ground floor. The consequence is naturally that we generate quite a different number of developers, but not only developers, but private institutions, foundations, housing communities, housing cooperatives, and so on. That also provides the diversity of product and makes the urban environment more adaptable. You see on the left-hand side, so to say, the boring urban harbor environment cleared of every existing building, and to build up this bottom-up. And this naturally shows at the end of the day the diversity of the residential product generated in this process at the end of the day. And we are talking about 2,000 residential units in this part. And this is another picture showing at the special solutions generated. And for reasons of time, I will not explain that. You have community groups which center around culture, but you have also professionals with their families organizing an own housing scheme where they contribute to the community, a public space, but have also their working environments in the building and so on. So the diversity of what you can create by these processes are far more significant. And by doing that, actually, we do not create only short-term diversity and inclusion, but also in terms of medium-term. When you are thinking about fine-grained structure of the urban design and the infrastructure, the schooling, the kindergarten, and everything else, and so to say, the commercial offer, that we at the end of the day have also some long-term resilience and adaptability, and basically in terms of instruments, improve that by actually creating community funds which actually last beyond Hafen City with 0.8 cents per square meter and month for residential space and 10 cents for commercial space. So there is even an organizational and financial capacity to go beyond that. So basically, diversity is not only created, but encounter capacity, and the social resilience is broad in terms of the way it can be made possible also into present-day activities. Let me come to the last point in terms of the dimensions we are talking about. Since it is a brownfield conversion, we are looking also very much into the downtown city structure, which is often for good when we are talking about the technological solutions. We are talking about how the urban mobility system is actually organized. We are talking about energy supply. We are talking about sustainable construction. We are talking about behavioral changes when we are talking about these aspects. One important element is, and I only want to show this, not to explain that we basically raise all the land, and by raising the land, build new infrastructure, we make this area flood-proof, but keep the link between actually the Hafen city area and the water. Here you see an existing old building, which is one of the remaining old buildings in Hafen city, the new ones, and you see the specific elements providing the technological base for flood-proof activities. And here you see flooding of Hafen city, which is worked, basically, so to say, worked into the system. And this is a flooding situation we had in 1962, where 300 people died in Hamburg. So you can make, so to say, even creating, so to say, an urban link, an urbanistic link between water and land, basically provide flood security. Sustainable mobility is creating walkability. I do not want to explain that in detail and the general framework of all the ideas necessary, but let me explain, we go actually beyond public transport, walkability, bikeability now by reducing the parking and actually try to create a win-win situation with developers and with the tenants or actually the other residents in the area by increasing the efficiency of parking, actually creating a big sharing, so to say, environment, but also integrating the technical parameters of the transformation to electrical mobility with 40% electrical car charging already integrated into the new buildings, but saving a lot of the cost of additional underground space for parking and making it part of the financing for the urban transformation in terms of electrical mobility, preserving, so to say, the consumer sovereignty of the people moving into your buildings. We have other elements in terms of eco-labeling, in terms of sustainable technologies. Some of these elements are shown here, and actually the communication of sustainability is an important element in our innovation centers. The consequences. When we are talking about such a possibility to generate futures, then we are talking about different types of organizational setup. You need an intermediary between the bureaucratic structure of a good urban, so to say, administration. This is not something an urban administration can do, and at least not on such a scale. On the other hand, private investors, as you know, would have a level of cooperation to be self-organizing and organizing all the infrastructure and the institutional linkages which are not possible. So what we are trying to do is to keep, so to say, the administration and the politics free of management, of strategic management issues. And on the other hand, reducing the risk of individual developers, reducing the uncertainty, guaranteeing the infrastructure at a certain point in time, making residual valuations while we expect innovations. So we are, so to say, actually, without having a formal partnership, we are generating a link between investors, developers on the one hand side, and all the range of their activities, and on the other hand, between the city's aspiration to build a future urban environment. So the developers become the innovators in the system without being forced to bear all the risk. And actually what is happening is that due to this institutional core capacity we have, the control of land, the capability of generating infrastructure, financial resources from the proceeds of sale of land, no money from the city budget, don't misunderstand me. Embedding in the real estate market. Personally, I come from the real estate market and have been working there for quite some time, and the capability of planning urban development and architecture, this requires then to develop network structures in order to generate the information and actually, at the end of the day, to come up constantly with new ideas. We're working now on this big urban transformation in terms of individual mobility with car sharing and electrical mobility. We're working now on a 19-story high-rise residential building built out of timber and a lot of different types of products, but also at different scale levels. And finally, I do not want to explain that, out of this process comes a lot of innovation which was basically never planned. So when you ask what a very big project can actually contribute to your city in terms of the future, it can organize, so to say, a co-working actually environment in which the private market and the city can organize transformation and make a big contribution to the future of the city. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor, but I'm going to ask you to come back on stage for our panel discussion, together with Christian Borret and Leo van Broek, de Brusselse bouwmeester, and de Vlaamse bouwmeester, and the professor as well, of course. And I propose that you all come on stage, yes, now, and take a microphone or two here. There's another one. Yeah, like Christian Borret, Brusselse bouwmeester. Have you visited Hamburg? You have a microphone? No. Yeah.
I've been there, I think, twice, and I'm leaving tomorrow evening to Hamburg.
Yeah. And what about you?
It's on my bucket list for one of the following months.
That's good. Now, how many microphones do we have? I think we have 3. Yeah, there. Okay. Yeah, you can just keep it. Yeah. So, how inspired are you after listening to all that?
I've investigated because I was inspired before. What I like a lot, in fact, you could say, is perhaps it's more on the governance level. We could discuss about the quality of architecture and the quality of public space. What I like a lot about the governance level is that it's an example of a project that goes on for nearly 20 years now, within a stable framework. I think that's very important. Even if you have to adapt an urban development project, you still have to have clear goals. Mm-hmm. And so that's what we need. We need, for instance, a political framework that is stable enough to allow that the project goes along that long time. It's the kind of thing I experienced in Antwerp as well. And I love the idea that you propose competitions, architectural competitions to private developers.
What about you?
I was very happy to get more than a confirmation, a kind of next level support. First of all, the first speaker, the lady who said that don't wait for the future, it's already here. I think it's very important that we learn to think ahead, not for within 20 years and, well, self-driving cars. No, in 25 years we probably hop from roof to roof with drones, which they are already experimenting with today. So we can't be fast enough in adapting to change that is not in the making sometime. It is probably already happening in a small garage somewhere. And what I liked in Hamburg is this idea that co-working is not only something from hipsters in a basement, but that co-working can be organized between large-scale stakeholders. I think this idea, you saw him also, he just poured the water for everybody. He's used to making the framework work. But he's doing that on a large scale with people who have big assets and big machines to change the city in a way that nobody is forced and that nobody has to take all the risk, and I like that method a lot.
Okay, what do you think? Can such a project be realized on a Belgian scale?
Well, that's the problem that Christian and me we are fighting with every day.
It's not, you're laughing, but it's actually not that
possible
funny.
in two ways. I think it is possible if you make abstraction of things that should change. I think we have the knowledge.
Whoa,
we have
but that's a big one, what you're saying there.
I will
It's
explain
possible?
It's possible and it's not possible. I think we have one of the highest skilled and educated populations in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
We have a very talented knowledge society. So it's not that we can't. It's not about ability. But I think the machinery, the way we are organized politically, spatially, needs to get some oil in the gearbox, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, I won't be pessimistic, never. So I think, of course, we can. Partially, we do. I think.
But.
For instance, the redevelopment of the Eilandje area is also a nice example of a kind of continuous redevelopment over more than 20 years now, doing the same thing and going in the same direction, so within a stable framework. So it's possible, but it needs a kind of, I think political authority needs to dare to delegate the execution, the realization of the project to an independent organization that can organize itself professionally. And that's what interested me in your last scheme about the institutional framework, because that's very dull, but it's the basis of a good project.
Mm-hmm. Professor, I see you're
maybe,
nodding.
Maybe I should add a little bit. We are, in terms of financing, in terms of land ownership and so on, naturally independent. But the chairman of my supervisory board is the first mayor of Hamburg, Olaf Scholz, and I have four, so to say, other members, so to say, state ministers on my board. So there is a long-term political guidance, and we were very happy, although government changed several times in between, that there was enough time to convince everyone, basically, that there is a big advantage to not shift, as it has been done in many countries of the world. Like now I go to Australia, for example. That you have some kind of continuity and do not create disruption in the understanding of what the project could achieve. And I think that is one of the very basic success elements. But having an extremely high level, so to say, governance level also allows you basically to provide the understanding at the political sphere what the issues are, and not to have basically a superfluous, so to say, understanding via the lower hierarchies of city administration. So either a state minister comes to the meeting, or he's not, his whole department is not present. So that's a fundamental rule which basically generates also an understanding, and so to say the chief, so to say, city planning officer is my counterpart. He says what in terms of architecture are the ideas, and I'm not thinking about that, but in terms of functional ideas, what the content of the city should be, how to deal with that, that is my responsibility. And the working together with these two aspects, the planning and the bottom-up, so to say, development of what is actually provided by market participants or civil society, which I did not mention, but which is very important in terms of being included in a lot of institutions, that is, so to say, constantly rebalanced and included.
That's a clear message.
Well, what is clear here is that it is necessary that we succeed, and after 20 years of bouwmeesters in Flanders, we also did some successful things, but we always, our fragile or weak spot is exactly how to get the knowledge and the really necessary actions, how to get the agenda across political coalitions, how to make the agenda last longer than one term. Mm-hmm. Because I think the faster changing world today, its behavior, its needs, are not so much depending on ideologies and politics anymore. It's a bit like bacteria and viruses. What antibiotics can do and can't do is not depending on your political ideology. It is data and knowledge and good practice.
Ja, en daar, ik zal het in het Nederlands zeggen, u legt de vinger op de zere wonden. Hè? You understand that?
Yes.
Yeah. But that, because that is, I think, one of the biggest challenges.
Yes, indeed. And in a way, it's a challenge not just for the bouwmeesters, but for all of us. Perhaps I would like to bring forward another point you mentioned. So that's the importance of the competitions in Hafen City. Interesting competitions because they are organized with private parties, with private partners. And for instance, with interesting mechanism, we don't know really at Brussels, for instance, that the price is dependable on the functions you propose. That means as a selling party, as a public authority, you can choose for a project that perhaps brings less money, but brings more interesting functions. Functions that are not able to pay a lot, but which you need in your urban neighborhood in order to have a diverse neighborhood. So that's, I think that's a mechanism in a very technical way about how to organize a competition that we could learn of it and introduce it in Belgium.
Okay, what else can Brussels learn from Hamburg? It's a question for all three of you, besides this point.
We both were taking pictures of his slide of the block with mixity.
Yes, of course.
I think the mixity of urban projects and urban fabrics is crucial to make the city livable. I think we all know today that the future will be urban or will not be, that's clear. But that's not enough. And density is not enough if it's monofunctional. Just like boring streets don't work if the ground floors are not active. But the idea that this mixity needs to mix also profitable and less profitable floors, and that it needs also competitions in which price is less important than concept and quality. We are fighting every week with inspections of finance, with people who say, no, we only want value for money, we don't care about value, we care more about money. I think this transition is very important, and that's what we learned from Hamburg, I think.
You agree?
I agree totally.
Yeah. You want to add something to that?
No, I agree also.
Oh, yeah. Okay, well, that's a good.
Can't you give us something to fight over?
No. It's good to agree, but now we have to get into action, of course, and that's the next step. It's one thing of knowing, and then the second thing is moving forward and actually get the
Perhaps,
people.
I think Hafen City is a beautiful project, and in fact, in Brussels we are lagging behind. We are in urban redevelopment. That's a disadvantage. There's one advantage that we can learn from the other projects. And perhaps we've been talking a lot about combining work and living here today. In fact, all ideas about work were very much hipster kinds of work. Co-working, working in the cappuccino bar, working on your laptop and so on. And so what is perhaps lacking in this new kind of development is also space for other kinds of work, for labor work, for handwork, for repair jobs. And so that's really what we put at stake now in the redevelopment of the canal area in Brussels. We want to do urban gentrification, urban renewal, but we want to keep and reinforce part of that kind of productive, low-profile activities and to keep them within the city. Because a plumber, you need them in the city, and we will always need a plumber, so you have to provide space for the plumber to, not just for the Apple computers at the cappuccino bar.
What we are also adding, I think, in Flanders, it's recent, we are trying to convince IKEA to build greenhouses for urban farming on all their shops. They will start in Antwerp to do one, a big greenhouse next to the Antwerp ring, on the north part of the ring. It's a promise, it's not a contract yet, but I'm looking forward to make it happen and to succeed, because it would be also a kind of joint venture of furniture and design factories who maybe have leased their roof to gardening to farmers, so to speak. And then the vegetables will drop down just next to the meatballs of IKEA, so to speak.
So the challenges are not only architectural, they're social, educational, ecological, it goes far beyond that. Now, I would like to invite you to have a look at this slide. It's in Dutch and it's in French. That's for the audience. But the Real Estate Federation has done a survey, and what comes out of that survey, that there's not a lot of support of local authorities to build more compact and to build in more layers.
It was a debate in the newspapers. I answered this morning in the Standard to the article of Olivier Karetov yesterday. And the complaint, I think, is justified. Although many local authorities are already trying to densify in a good way and are jumping on that new train. However, there is still a big majority who has problems, but I don't know, it's a double cause. There is a lack of political courage, but in any democracy, the people get the politicians that they deserve. So if the politics don't dare, it means that their electorate doesn't dare or doesn't understand. So I think as long as the average Flemish citizen loves his car, his villa more than nature and more than the village center or the city, we have a problem. So debate is necessary
So
to
it's
create
very
political
deep,
support
it's
and
very-
electoral support for change.
Yeah.
And I think there, as long as action committees who call 4 levels already a tower are blocking good density projects, and if the exchange of developable rights is not happening with an increase of profit, just with safeguarding the same amount of profit, just relocating it and stacking it on a better density place with better mobility possibilities, then I think they are just not machines who try to make more money. They try to keep the same amount of profitability and do it in a better way. And I think politicians should have the courage to help.
Yeah, it's more courage, meer algemeen belang.
Yeah, I think this is a debate that is in fact more valid for Flanders and for urban sprawl. In the big city of Brussels, we have a lot of densification projects. And in some sense, the issue is more about downsizing a bit of densification, because you have to provide open space too. You have to provide other functions than just building apartments. So in many cases, my job is also reducing a bit of the density. But I would make a plea. I think the situation in Brussels is very much different for the central part of Brussels and for the deuxième couloir, or the 20th century belt in Brussels, where we have very few densification projects and where local mayors are very much opposed against it. For me, it's not very logic to add more and more towers along the canal area in the really city center, while in municipalities like Jette, Evere and Woluwe, in fact, there are enough opportunities, very much linked to public transport, to densify, and even there, for instance, to propose a tower. It's such a pity. We made a master plan for the Parkway E40 project, mixing languages, along the highway, the E40 and the Rue Colonel Bourg, where we proposed towers up till 18 floors, and then this was not approved by the government, but not approved now by the municipality. So this kind of friction, it exists in Brussels as well, but more in the 20th century belt. That's really the place where we should densify and we should promote more densification.
Okay, I would like to give the audience the opportunity to ask some questions, but before we go to the audience, Professor, give us 3 good reasons to go to Hamburg and visit.
Well, the first would be, I think you are all interested in culture, although it will be difficult to get tickets. Visit Elbphilharmonie. You should at least visit the public plaza. I think it is a great location, and you will understand in terms of an iconic building and in terms of public space what value it can have for a city. Secondly, I think it is, at least from the real estate development point and the urban planning point in terms of architecture, it is interesting to visit Hafen City. Even if it is not finished, but you can see a lot of what probably I have tried to convey, and if you look a little bit more in detail, you probably understand it far better in terms of the possibilities. And finally, I think Hamburg has become a very interesting touristic city. with more than 6 million visitors, probably less than Brussels has at the present moment, but we keep on trying to improve it. So you can have a very relaxed weekend in Hamburg, either with your family or on your own, and enter a flight, so to say, it's 1 hour flight, or by other means, so to say, and Hamburg is definitely closer than Berlin.
Okay. Thank you very much. Now, maybe we can get some lights in the audience, and there are some microphones. So, si vous voulez poser une question ou faire une remarque, als u een vraag wil stellen, if you want to ask a question, don't hesitate. People are here to listen to you, to share, to...
I have a question for Professor Brins Berentelk. I think that many people over here in the audience would like to know if Hafen City was a commercial success, because it lasts for about 20 years from the beginning till now, and it's not totally finished. But could you say, when you look back, is it till now a commercial success? Did the developer get his reward and return on the investment?
We do not know in every individual case, naturally, and I think most of the developers engaged in Hafen City have been coming back and back to apply, so to say, for plots in different urban environments. And we, for example, for the last 6 plots I put on public tender, I had 48 applications. So when you have such a situation, a very competitive market, that is an indicator that people make also profit, and that's not only representing city ambition. With regard to the timing, I must make clear that the first building started in 2003, and basically it was thought that it would take 25 years, but we started out with 1.5 million square meter gross floor area. It is now 2.4. So we have been increasing, so to say, the volume, but kept the timing for the transformation completely in line with the original planning. So actually the ambition, which was the project started, has been increasing, and the time frame has been successfully met, although we started basically in the new economy crisis in the year 2000, had a crisis in 2007, 8, 9, and a number of years where no investment interest was there. So I think it is a good record for the developers and for the city. And 1 or 3 of the consortiums broke up in the financial crisis, that is clear, but they were bank-led consortiums with very big banks from a neighboring country, you know, and probably, so to say, but we have been, so to say, recouping the capacity to deal with also in a changed market with these big projects. So I would think from the commercial side, it is a success, and in terms of our long-term calculation, we have a DCF analysis with cost and income flows until 2025 and until 2030. It is balancing, and my target is, and it is set politically, to have no profit, but to make, so to say, break even. It looks like I'm making break even.
Another question? Yeah.
June 2016 started a race by a number of European cities, or all European cities, to try and get their share of the decision that the Brits were no longer Europeans and that they were slowly going to float toward the US. We've heard a number of consultants say that the German city that was best positioned behind obviously Brussels, which is not a German city, that the best German city was Berlin and not Hamburg. Why is that so? Do you regret it? Are you running that race against other European cities? What is Berlin doing better than you are? How are you trying to catch them up? Is that a concern?
I think what you have been raising in terms of the question is not something which can easily be changed. In terms of the Brexit, some of the companies, so to say, which considering, for example, relocating and benefiting from maybe shifting the financial sector activities, might be Frankfurt, because it has this very strong financial sector. But it may be Dublin, it may be Paris, maybe Amsterdam, so we don't know yet. Brussels might be, yes. The second point is Berlin has a certain hype at the present moment due to the fact that land values are still very low, that there are still very derelict sites, that so the rental levels are far lower than in Munich, for example, and Frankfurt or in Hamburg. So we will not be structurally in a position to basically compete with Berlin on these issues. So as far as, so to say, the prop tech and quite a number of other innovations are generated, I think Berlin will be the city in Germany which will benefit most from the growth of the next 10 years. But on the other hand, we have a dramatically changing media sector, we have a game sector, we have quite a number of, so to say, green industries. So Hamburg has been cutting and carving out very significant sectors where it is leading also the German economy. But when you have, so to say, far higher per capita income, as you know, for example, in Hamburg than in Berlin, for example, at a similar level than Brussels and Paris and central London, that to grow at an equivalent level as Berlin is doing, that is almost impossible.
Now, it was obviously a good question because the two city architects are sitting on the edge of their chair to react.
Yeah, although at a very general level, of course, Brexit is a pity thing. It could be an opportunity for Brussels. On the other hand, I think we have, of course, an office space crisis in Brussels now. There's a lot of vacancy. I think we should consider prices as a challenge, and so perhaps not see it as a trap now. You could see it as a trap that Brexit could be solving our vacancy problem now. I would like to challenge you to think in a more fundamental way about monofunctional office neighborhoods. I think the Quartier du Nord is a problem, even if, thanks to Brexit, we will be able to attract some new end users over there. I think we should rethink the Quartier du Nord in a more fundamental way. I think it shouldn't be a monofunctional office area.
You agree with that? Yes.
I think the Brexit also proves that democracy doesn't work if there is no awareness among the citizens for what they are voting. So I think we have to give a lot more knowledge transfer in debate and in information, also towards what's happening in the world of real estate and urban development. And that would be a nice opportunity if you compare Hamburg and Berlin, and this I don't know, to what extent they are similar in merging the two speakers of today, which is the sharing economy and the real estate sector. In Germany, they have a lot of Genossenschaften where people are not buying nor renting, but they live based on a share that they have. They are a shareholder, they are dweller and part of the developer at the same time. So they can't go and do a manifestation against the developer because they are the developer and the dweller at the same time. So, and I think maybe that fusion is also what we need in the northern area. That is that we enter a lot more citizens into this 100% monofunctional office neighborhood.
Okay, I think there's one more question from, yes.
Excuse me. We understood that the project of Hamburg was based on a good collaboration and good partnership between the authorities, the political authorities, and the private sector. The private sector is, per definition, stable. We see here in our association the same people since 30 years. But you have in Germany, like in Belgium, regularly elections. And elections means means change in the political authority. Did you have to manage a change in the personality representing Hamburg during the 2 years of the project? And is it possible to manage it?
Actually, you asked two questions, and I will start out with a simple one. You asked at the end, because I started out with a Christian Democratic mayor, with a Free Democratic Party, and even a right-wing party at that time. So a coalition environment. Then it was absolute majority Christian Democrats, then it was Christian Democrats and Green Party, and then it became absolute majority of Social Democrats, and then Social Democrats and Green Party now. So we survived, I might say, in a very productive and intelligent way, all those political twist changes. I think that is important, so that the mayor becomes, so to say, the head, the chair of the supervisory board, so that there is a direct contact between the management level and the supervisory level. That is fundamental. Your first question, I would not agree, the first comment I would not agree on completely. When the Social Democratic mayor started out, so to say, his politics on mobilizing the housing sector in Hamburg, he didn't say simply, we want, so to say, more housing. Because in 2010, there were 3,700 housing units. So he set up an alliance for housing, cooperating with the private sector, with a public housing company, with the 7 boroughs of Hamburg, and setting up an agreement and targets for the next 4-year period, which amounted to 10,000 building permits. This cooperation was based on, so to say, strategic, so to say, process easements, more administrative capacity in terms of generating building permits, and a little bit more money for the boroughs. It was a regular monthly meeting headed by the mayor, and so on. So he set up an informal system of mobilizing markets and integrating the market and the administrative and political system. And the agreement has been renewed in 2016, though the private market is not stable. The private market can, and the actors can change in terms of their ambitions, their targets, and their possibilities dramatically if you basically introduce a framing which allows more than the normal understanding, well, the market is doing what the market is doing. So the market can be mobilized in a way that market potential is generated and changed very much at a city level.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, thank you very much, gentlemen. I think it's getting quite hot in here, and I think you're all probably thirsty and hungry. So you're all, of course, invited. I think we have to leave the stage from at the end. No, there, that way. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup de votre présence et de votre attention. Dank u wel. Ik hoop dat u gemotiveerd bent en ik zou willen zeggen, ga goed kijken, hou de ogen en de oren wijd open, want dat is uiteindelijk ook heel belangrijk. Een hele fijne namiddag en voor straks wel thuis. Thank you very much.